In this current era, perhaps more than ever before, societal norms persistently instill in women the idea that bodily silence, the absence of outward expressions of desire, is nothing more than a sign of deficit, emptiness, or even emotional depletion. But what if this established view is fundamentally mistaken? What if this seeming silence is in fact the very first, barely perceptible whisper of an awakening soul, a harbinger of the deepest inner transformations? When a woman, whether consciously or intuitively, decides to distance herself from the pervasive games of desire and free herself from the persistent chains of superficial attachments, phenomena of an immeasurably deeper order begin to manifest within her inner world. This state should not be perceived as an absence of anything, but as a genuine presence, not as a lack, but as a grand expansion of one's own being. As the distinguished psychologist Carl Jung would insightfully note, all accumulated and suppressed energetic force inevitably finds an entirely new path for its manifestation. And when the physical body ceases to be distracted by instantaneous, fleeting pleasures and external stimuli, the soul finally gains the long-awaited and necessary space to find its own unique voice. Have you ever wondered why such a significant number of women report a completely unexpected, yet profound, spiritual awakening after periods of conscious abstinence? This is not merely about heightened sensitivity, but a genuine perception of the subtlest energies. Not just vivid dreams, but messages from the deepest realms of the unconscious. Not just sharp intuitions, but an infallible inner knowing that was previously inaccessible. This is by no means a mere coincidence. It is nothing less than a powerful, beckoning call. The body, deprived of habitual external touches and distractions, inevitably begins to turn inward, to its origins, and it is there, in this long-forgotten and unexplored territory of the pearl inner world, that a woman discovers, with astonishing wonder, parts of herself that were never before visible to her, let alone to anyone else. It is important to emphasize that this phenomenon is not limited solely to the practice of celibacy or sexual abstinence. In reality, it is about a much larger process, a transmutation, a grand transformation of life energy that ceases to desperately seek in the external world, in other people or circumstances, what can truly be nurtured and revealed only deep within one's own being. This is a path to self-sufficiency, to the acquisition of an inner strength that can change all reality. Society, deeply rooted in a paradigm of continuous pursuit of sexual validation, experiences a certain fear of a woman who consciously distances herself from these expectations. Her detachment makes her an unpredictable figure, enveloped in mystery and essentially inviolable. The reason for this fear also lies in the fact that she begins to see through things. Her gaze penetrates superficial games, cycles of emotional repetitions, and the masks of relationships that, instead of granting true freedom, tend to enslave. Carl Gustav Jung would probably characterize this process as a fateful encounter with one's own shadow. This is a crucial moment when a woman ceases to actively strive to be chosen by someone, but, on the contrary, gains the inner strength and right to choose independently. Her motivation becomes not the desire to love in order to be loved in return, but a deep and all-encompassing self-love, developing with such powerful intensity that all superficial and external elements naturally lose their significance and dissolve. There is a special kind of silence that is by no means emptiness. On the contrary, it is like a sacred temple. When external hustle and bodily impulses subside, it is because the inner essence, the soul, is about to ignite with a light capable of unsettling others. A woman who chooses a life path without sexual relationships or traditional partnerships is not internally empty or dead at all. In fact, she may feel more alive than ever before, reaching the peak of her inner existence. What appears from the outside as an absence of something, be it a partner or passion, in reality turns into an abundance of deep inner presence. What is often perceived as loneliness upon closer inspection turns out to be a profound unity with a reality that no external passion or fleeting infatuation could ever touch. It is in this sacred and intimate space that the archetype of the wild woman awakens. This is the part of her being that reconnects with her primordial ancestral wisdom, with pure and unadulterated instinct, with authentic femininity that does not need public approval or attention. Such a state is deeply felt at an intuitive level. This call is not for everyone. It is addressed to those who have experienced complete satiety from exchanging their true essence for fleeting moments of illusory connections. It is for those who deeply understand what they truly seek is not in the embrace of another person, but in a radical, transformative confrontation with their own self. If a person has reached this point, it is very likely that they are much closer to this path than they might have assumed. Indeed, the physical begins to quiet, but this is by no means a sign of weakness. On the contrary, it is inner energy temporarily retreating only to manifest later with unprecedented power, and when the soul begins to speak, there is no turning back. For a woman who has once heard the voice of her soul will never again be content with the muffled sound of ordinary feelings. In every woman's life there comes a moment when the surrounding world, with all its manifestations, becomes unbearably loud. This refers not so much to external noise as to the internal whispers of others' expectations, to desires imposed upon her, and to attachments presented as undeniable truths. And it is in this deep exhaustion, barely discernible to others, that the very path to her authentic self begins. According to Carl Jung, everything a person denies in the depths of their soul inevitably returns as fate. Perhaps this is why, when the physical body chooses silence, it should not be regarded as a failure. Rather, it indicates that something grand is striving to manifest from within, paving the way to a new state of being. A woman who begins to distance herself from those inner impulses that previously guided her existence, without fully comprehending the profound reasons for what is happening, is already hearing an unheard yet powerful call, emanating not from physical needs or worldly desires, but from the depths of her true essence. This woman, even unconsciously, begins to feel an undefined but deep longing. This is not a sentimental memory of a specific person, not a yearning for physical contact or fleeting passion. It is rather a longing for her own authentic self, for that state of being or place of destiny that remains as yet unattainable, but whose existence she intuitively senses. In light of these inner transformations, the phenomenon of abstinence is perceived not as a form of deprivation or punishment, but as a kind of gateway leading to profound changes. Stepping across this threshold, the individual embarks on a path that the distinguished psychoanalyst Carl Gustav Jung termed the process of individuation, a fundamental movement towards inner harmony and wholeness. During this journey, there is a rejection of those external projections that were previously unconsciously transferred onto others, which finally allows one to turn to the true understanding of one's own essence. The resulting feeling of inner emptiness is not a sign of lack or loss. On the contrary, it is a fertile space being prepared for the emergence and development of something significantly more authentic and true. It is within this inner expanse that past memories begin to manifest differently. They cease to be painful, bleeding wounds, transforming into a kind of key to understanding a broader and deeper personal history. Past romantic relationships, nights ending in bitter tears, and recurring life cycles without obvious reasons, all these elements of the past begin to unfold and acquire an entirely different, profound meaning in light of a new perspective. For a woman who consciously embraces and cultivates inner silence does not withdraw from the fullness of being. On the contrary, she actively engages in reinterpreting and rewriting her personal history, viewing it from an entirely different, more mature position. Her deeper self is now capable of perceiving emotional experiences as symbolic reflections of the unconscious, that part of the psyche that constantly tried to convey its messages to her, but whose quiet voices were previously drowned out by the all-consuming noise of worldly desires and external aspirations. Over time, step by step, she realizes that all need for external applause or approval from others falls away. Her true value is determined not by the degree of desire her physical body evokes in others, but by the depth with which she can hold the inner presence of her soul in silence and peace. It is at this turning point that a power, almost mystical in nature, is born. This power belongs to a woman who no longer strives to be chosen or recognized. And it is at this point that the world begins to fear her, for it knows not how to interact with one who has ceased to beg or seek love. Her being gains wholeness, and therefore she poses a danger to everything that continues to exist in a state of fragmentation or incompleteness. When such a woman comes to understand that her life energy is by no means dormant, but merely temporarily retreated, she transitions into an entirely different state of consciousness, a space where there is no rush and no need to prove anything to anyone. For the silence of the body is not punishment, not limitation. It is, in essence, a special language, and this language is accessible to understanding only by those who possess sufficient courage to immerse themselves and dwell in their own inner depths. The eminent thinker Carl Gustav Jung would undoubtedly describe this as a process of reconciliation with the feminine unconscious, as a reunion with ancient archetypal symbols that had been buried under centuries of suppression. It is noteworthy that this reconciliation is achieved not through words or logical reasoning, but through pure, unwavering presence. Such a woman is only beginning her journey toward full manifestation. However, this path does not promise to be easy or cloudless. On the contrary, it is accompanied by deep unease, an invisible longing that gradually eats away at her from within. When a woman slowly begins to distance herself from immediate impulses, from habitual forms of communication, and from the direct presence of another person nearby, she simultaneously distances herself from everything that once formed her sense of belonging. And what remains at first is a deep, almost unbearable discomfort, as if the surrounding world no longer acknowledges her existence, as if her absence in the never-ending game of desires has made her completely invisible. Carl Jung would undoubtedly call this the beginning of an encounter with her own shadow. This refers to that part of her personality that has been suppressed for many years, that was accustomed to living in constant adaptation to others' expectations, craved approval from outside, but now resolutely refuses to continue this exhausting game of pretense. At this critical moment she is overcome by tormenting doubts. Has she made a fatal mistake by withdrawing? Is she losing her mind? Is she wasting precious time, youth, and numerous opportunities that she thought were available? For society tirelessly tells her that a woman's time is fleeting, that she must constantly move forward, conquer new horizons, be desired, and meet countless expectations. And suddenly she discovers that she no longer fits anywhere. She ceases to be a lover, a wife, an inspirer, or a loyal friend. Now she is simply herself, without any external roles. And this inner realization wounds her far more deeply than any, even the most painful, separation from another person. The period of abstinence that has entered her life sometimes begins to feel like a harsh punishment. However, this perception is deceptive. In reality, what lies before her is not punishment, but a profound test, a kind of symbolic journey that only those souls truly ready for such a significant transformation can endure. In these moments, various temptations inevitably arise. Familiar, long-forgotten patterns of behavior persistently remind themselves, literally, knocking on the door of her consciousness. Easy, tempting invitations reappear, as if the entire surrounding world seeks to test the strength of her will. The most agonizing aspect of this path, however, is the complete lack of understanding from those around her. Close friends, genuinely concerned, ask questions, trying to penetrate the essence of her state. Family members, driven by the best intentions, persistently suggest she go out more often, fearing that she is withdrawing into herself. But what is happening is by no means voluntary isolation. It is a deep, all-consuming immersion into herself, into the most hidden corners of her own soul. And not everyone is capable of being an impartial witness to how one soul dares to go to such depths, while the rest of humanity continues to carelessly glide across the surface of existence. The eminent thinker Carl Gustav Jung, who deeply explored the human psyche, viewed such a state as an integral and inevitable stage of the individuation process. This is a critical moment when the habitual ego, feeling the loss of its former control over the situation, is seized by panic, while the true essence, the soul, barely noticeably but confidently begins to take the lead. It is in this state of deep, sometimes silent despair that many people give up, preferring to surrender. They return to long familiar, though ineffective, old patterns of behavior, agree to faded relationships and languid, compromising love, convincing themselves of the illusory truth that having something is always preferable to having nothing at all. However, the woman who possesses the inner strength to remain in this state without retreating, even through bitter tears and tormenting doubts, gradually becomes something immeasurably greater than her former self. Her soul calls her to break the vicious circle of recurring mistakes and old patterns. It is important to understand that such cycles cannot be broken by brute force or willpower. They can only be broken through deep awareness, through inner enlightenment. The tension she feels during this period is not evidence of a mistake or a wrong path, but rather a sign of an inevitable transition to a new stage of being. Just as a cocoon contracts, preparing for the birth of a beautiful butterfly, so too something sacred is happening within her inner world. In this saving darkness of silence, away from external noise, an entirely new, transformed being is born. Deep within her being, she realizes this truth, even when it is impossible to explain it in words, even when her soul is shackled by the fear of being too lonely, too misunderstood, too deep for the world. There is an inner voice that does not cry out, but persistently asserts its presence. There is an invisible presence that does not manifest overtly, but relentlessly accompanies her through life. It is this unseen presence that is the embodiment of archetypal femininity, the very anima that Carl Jung described as the most important bridge connecting consciousness with the mysterious depths of the unconscious. It is with this inner principle that the woman begins to establish a connection, and the deeper this intimate inner dialogue becomes, the more clearly and fully she begins to understand herself. Her body is not in a state of stasis or cessation. On the contrary, it is in the process of a ritual. This is an ancient ritual, long forgotten by modern society, but one to which her soul has always intuitively known the way. And then something subtly changes, almost imperceptibly. A completely new understanding begins to blossom. What previously caused only superficial concern now transforms into deeper and more insightful questions. Why did I always need to feel desired to truly feel alive? Why does the absence of another person become so unbearable? What in me still feeds on another's gaze to gain the right to exist? However, the transformed woman no longer uses relationships as a kind of anesthetic designed to dull inner pain or emptiness. She no longer exchanges her sincere affection for the mere presence of someone's company. And even if this decision results in long, silent nights for her, she knows firmly, her body is not in a state of abstaining from anything. It is in a state of protection. It carefully preserves inner space for something true that emanates from the depths of the soul and not from a feeling of lack or deficit. Profound transformation reaches its culmination at the moment when a woman understands that she no longer needs to be the object of anyone's search. She herself is an unshakable center, a blazing fire, radiating her own unique light. And as this inner radiance intensifies, those who cannot withstand its dazzling intensity naturally retreat. At the same time, those who will only later appear on her horizon will never dare to approach her with half measures or incomplete sincerity, for a woman who has passed through the crucible of deep solitude and inner silence is no longer willing to tolerate existence in twilight or uncertainty. She becomes inaccessible to trivial, ordinary relationships because she herself has long ceased to be an ordinary person. And when the physical nature calms down, sinking into silence, it is the soul that takes the reins, making its final choice. And the soul, once awakened to true being, will never choose what once caused it pain or left deep wounds. At this moment she rises not merely as an individual returning to the familiar world, but as an essence that itself becomes part of this world, its embodiment. Every subsequent step she takes is now filled with deep awareness. Every choice is weighed not under the pressure of fear of loneliness, but in accordance with the true value of her own inner world and self-sufficiency. The physical body, which once remained in a state of silent acceptance or even suffering, now vibrates at an entirely new frequency. It has become more subtle, deeper, and most importantly, truer. All need to rush to fill inner voids or desperately strive to fit into spaces that would prove too tight and limited for her renewed soul has disappeared. The great thinker Carl Jung once remarked that what we persistently deny ultimately subjugates us, whereas what we bravely integrate into our personality truly transforms us. And this woman has finally managed to fully integrate her former absences or lacks. She has transformed deficiency into a kind of refuge, making it her home. She has turned the deep silence previously experienced into a sacred altar of personal growth and revelations. However, there is something that remains unnoticed by most. She does not expect anyone to come to her aid. This is because a woman who has passed through her own depths of darkness no longer needs external salvation. She has found her own deliverance, and this act of self-liberation fundamentally transforms her entire essence. She is no longer capable of returning to her previous state of being. What once felt like an acute need has now become a conscious choice. What previously seemed like compulsion has turned into mature discernment. She is undoubtedly capable of love, but her love now comes not from deficit, but from an abundance of inner fullness. And when such a feeling enters her life, it does not come to replenish or complete her being, but to become a loyal companion on her path. For her soul has already attained its absolute wholeness. This new state awakens something deeply fundamental in her, a clear sense of mission, unwavering purpose, and impeccable clarity of worldview. She understands that her personal experience was not merely an individual experience, it was symbolic. Her once silent image now embodies all those women who were also taught dependence, distracted from their own essence, and persuaded to make concessions. And now she feels a powerful inner urge to become a beacon, not to pave the way for others, but to ignite their own fire. For only one who has managed to find herself in the depths of darkness can teach others not to fear it. Carl Gustav Jung would probably characterize this as a true manifestation of the self, when the soul no longer seeks to be accepted by society, but yearns to be fully expressed. All the baggage of losses she has accumulated on her life's journey, be they former attachments, fragile self-images, or relationships where she had to diminish herself to meet others' expectations, no longer cause the acute emotional torment they once did. Now, each such loss is perceived by her as a genuine liberation. Every absence is felt by her as a long-awaited answer to heartfelt prayers, for the woman who has gone through a period of physical abstinence has discovered true nourishment for her soul. And it is this inner nourishment that sustains her from within, saturating every aspect of her being. No external manifestations, no external sources will be sufficient if they do not find a deep resonance in what has already taken root and blossomed within her nature. For this reason, she now does not strive to return to former roles or to recreate old life scenarios, but prepares to occupy an entirely different, unique place in this world. This is a space where the very fact of her presence is complete and self-sufficient, where her voice possesses true weight and significance, and her silence is perceived as something sacred, filled with deep meaning. And when her bodily nature awakens desire again, it will not be a manifestation of emotional dependence or need, but a conscious, sacred choice, dictated by inner harmony. When love one day knocks on her door, it will not find a woman tormented by need or craving to fill a void. On the contrary, it will meet a person who is whole, complete, and absolutely ready for true, deep relationships. Until that moment arrives, she maintains her resilience, existing not in a state of forced abstinence, but in a deep, conscious, spiritual wakefulness. For now, she knows for certain, though her body may be silent, it is only because her soul has finally found its voice and spoken in full force. There are periods of silence that, at first glance, may seem cold or alienated, yet in their depths they hold sparks of living fire, like embers capable of rekindling. Similarly, other absences perceived by the outside world as an irreplaceable loss are in fact fertile ground for inner growth and maturation. In this context, women who consciously distance themselves from the bustling world are noteworthy. They do not fade away. On the contrary, they ignite on an entirely different, higher level of being. When the physical body enters a state of rest and silence, it is not destroyed. Instead, it transforms into a kind of altar, a sacred and inviolable space where the soul finally gains the necessary courage for self-expression. And everything that previously seemed like a flaw or a lack in life's journey now appears as a divine presence, carefully nurturing a new identity, a personality marked by greater clarity, exceptional rarity, and true wholeness. Nothing from past experiences ever disappears without a trace. Every event, every feeling, undergoes a deep inner transmutation. Thus, a desire that once felt like a pressing and urgent need transforms into a conscious choice. Pain, previously an open and bleeding wound, becomes an honorable scar of wisdom, a testament to trials overcome. A woman who undergoes a period of abstinence or voluntary solitude with full awareness does not detach herself from the ability to love. On the contrary, she learns to love from a new state, one where the former hunger or deficit is absent, giving way to abundance and fullness. And in this serene inner abundance she discovers a true sense of untouchable peace. This occurs not because someone is deprived of the ability to reach her, but because no one is able to manipulate her anymore. A person sometimes senses within themselves the reflection of a particular path. This feeling manifests as a nameless nostalgia, a discomfort that familiar surroundings are no longer home, and an inexplicable desire to step back from previous orientations. Such a state is not a sign of weakness or fragility. On the contrary, it is the first, barely perceptible call foreshadowing change. It is quite possible that this message finds its recipient not by chance. It may serve as a mirror, reflecting something that has long pulsed in the depths of the soul but has not yet been fully realized or clearly named. And as soon as this inner stirring receives its recognition, changes inevitably occur in the individual's life. If this path has touched a forgotten part of a person's essence, they should allow themselves to continue this journey. One should not extinguish the newly kindled spark of inner insight. Ultimately, this journey shapes an individual, often a woman, who has learned to heed the quiet whisper of her soul, even when the external world is too loud and chaotic. And this inner voice confidently asserts that she is not alone, that she is on the threshold of her awakening.